Welcome to another episode of Thompson Hine's Environmental Laws podcast. This is environmental law, so of course we needed another acronym. LAWS. It stands for Land, Air, Water, and Safety. And that's exactly what we talk about on this podcast. In our podcast episodes, we cover current topics in environmental and health and safety laws in the United States from the perspective of Thompson Hine attorneys, the regulated community, regulators, and the occasional special guest. We know you're busy, so our goal is to provide practical and efficient insight to you on timely EHS topics. So hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. My name is Tasha Miracle, and I'm an associate in Thompson Hine's Environmental Practice Group. Today, I am joined by my colleague, Heidi Friedman. Heidi is a partner in Thompson Hine's Environmental Practice Group. She probably doesn't require an introduction to most of our listeners, but just in case, I'll quickly share that Heidi has been practicing environmental law for nearly 25 years. Sorry I let the cat out of the bag, Heidi.
Thanks.
She focuses her practice on environmental health and safety counseling in business, regulatory and legislative matters, environmental and toxic tort litigation, environmental enforcement actions, site remediation, product stewardship, and compliance with environmental regulations. Is there anything she doesn't do on the EHS front? I don't think so. Heidi has been recognized as a super lawyer, an Ohio super lawyer, top ranked by Chambers USA, and identified as one of the best lawyers in America for nearly 16 years. Heidi was also recently selected as a fellow by the American College of Environmental Lawyers. If I listed all of Heidi's many, many accolades and distinctions as an EHS attorney, we would be here all day, so I won't do that. Instead, we'll jump right into today's topic. Heidi and I will be discussing a legal icon and American treasure who I'm sure is familiar to you all, the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. In light of Justice Ginsburg's recent passing, we wanted to dedicate a podcast to talking about her legacy in the area of environmental law. RBG is known for so many things, but not many focus on her impact in this area. So we're very lucky to have such an environmental law expert and one of RBG's biggest fans here to talk with us about this today. Heidi, welcome to the Environmental Laws podcast.
So fun to be here and talk to you about my favorite person.
Well, as I just mentioned, as you just said, RBG is, you're a huge fan of RBGs. So can you tell us a little bit about why you're such a huge fan of RBGs and what drew you to her?
Absolutely. So RBG, I was appointed to the Supreme Court about the time I graduated from law school, since you already let the cat out of the bag. I was a child prodigy.
Right.
And, she's a tiny Jewish lawyer. So like it or not, those are three of my characteristics. And I think what really drew me to her at that time and continues to draw me to her was, she's somewhat multifaceted, right? So she was also very dedicated to her children and to her husband, which are important things to me. She found time to work out. There's some great videos of her working out, which I think is a good balance. But she was someone who did not accept the status quo for what it was. She really lived, be the change you want to see in the world. And these are all qualities I admire and I aspire to achieve, I would say. And in fact, sometimes I take it to another level with her. We just did a tribute for a national bar that I'm involved with, and I actually dressed in my full RBG garb. And anyone that visits my home office or my office here, I have my RBG pillow and mug that you got me, actually, and other things as well. So that's probably a good enough explanation.
Well, I'm very sad that you didn't wear the RBG costume for this podcast, but I appreciate why you didn't. It's probably a little bit difficult to walk in, the full-length robe. And as you said, RBG is certainly a tiny Jewish lawyer with a powerful punch, just like you. So I understand why that draws you to her. So I'm wondering and you sort of touched on this, but I'm wondering if you could tell us more about what you think the late Justice Ginsburg represents for female attorneys.
Absolutely. I think it's important to understand sort of the framework we're talking about. So look at it this way. When Justice Ginsburg was born in 1933, 4% of the federal judges were female. When she was appointed to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals by President Carter in 1980, 5.3% of the federal judges were female. And when she got to the Supreme Court in 1993, only 10%. And today, 27 years later, we're literally at 27%. So we're at a foundational situation where, in terms of gender in the profession, it's grown, but not at the rate you would expect it to be when 50% of the population is women. And she still was only the second female to be appointed to the Supreme Court. But in addition to that, I would say that she was one of 9 women at Harvard Law. Now we at least see 50% of women in law school classes, although the statistics of women achieving equity partner and certainly general counsel positions and the like, we can do a whole nother podcast on what we're going to do about that problem. But she launched the ACLU Women's Rights Project. Her granddaughter works there. She was one of Forbes' most powerful women for 7 years in a running. And I could just kind of go on and on. And so we have sort of the general framework of these sad statistics that have continued to grow. And what she did was try to literally pave the way so more women in the profession can succeed. And I think there's very few female lawyers that I speak to who do not admire her and understand the impact she had on gender in the profession.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think she's absolutely broken down a lot of barriers for women lawyers in the profession. And you going through some of those stats, it really just speaks to how tough of a path that was for her and how much she did for women in the profession. So now I'd like to parry a little bit and talk a bit about why RBG has become such an American icon. Why do you think that is?
It's an interesting question. I think, like I mentioned a minute ago, I've participated in a couple of tributes for her, and she really does have universal impact, politics aside. And, think about the lace collar. Now her lace collar, there's dog costumes, there's earrings, there's, name it. It's just everywhere. And to me, that kind of is a symbol of her universal impact. She also is an example of how two people with differing views can get together, which I think is something we need a whole lot more of these days. And I'm referring to her very special relationship with Justice Scalia.
Bless her.
Bless her, right? She was on opposite ends of the spectrum, but they became friends over their mutual love for opera. So I feel like all of us could, be better and do better if we try to find common ground with people we may disagree with on other things, be it legal or otherwise. And then she's, special to people she actually played a bigger role in things beyond gender, and we'll talk about the environmental aspect. But I would also say that she has played a big impact on same-sex marriage. And although she was not the author of that, very important opinion, she offered some very key questions during oral argument that I know folks found to be very impactful. And she was actually the first Supreme Court justice to perform a same-sex marriage ceremony in 2003, actually, to the executive director of the Kennedy Center at the time. So, it's just really this universal impact that I think has made her the icon that she is today.
That's amazing. I didn't know that about her being the first justice to officiate a same-sex marriage. That's fantastic. And it certainly, it echoes what we all know about RBG, which was she fought for people who are underrepresented and who didn't have maybe as much power as they should have in our society. So she definitely is an American icon for all of her efforts on that front.
Absolutely. I have lots of fun facts, but we'll try to fit a few more in today.
We'll sprinkle them out throughout
Exactly.
the episode. Stay tuned, folks. Lots more to come.
Exactly.
So you touched on this, and I would like to go ahead and talk about that now, her environmental legacy. So as you said, she was appointed to the court in 1993, only the second woman. She was there quite a long time. So could you tell us more about what her impact in the area of environmental law was?
Absolutely. So she actually played a decent role. She was an advocate for the environment. I would say, looking at it very high level, Ruth Bader Ginsburg definitely believed in the role of the federal government to regulate. She combined it with a very basic perspective that we need to look at the intent of the statutes and regulations that we're trying to apply. And she worked very hard at that. And she also felt that we need to read the environmental statutes to be protective of the media they were trying to protect, like clean air, clean water, all of those. That was very important to her. And she wanted to understand the purpose behind them. Believe it or not, though, she was also known as a pro-business justice, and she had a pretty good reputation for that, which is really one of the reasons she was confirmed so easily. She was actually confirmed 96-3. And based on the fact that Judge Barrett was confirmed yesterday, as we're sitting here with such a divided Senate, it's hard to believe that anyone was confirmed by 96-3. But that's just, again, goes back to her Justice Ginsburg's universal acceptance and, the fact that she was really across the spectrum. Although her politics may have been liberal, she was somebody who applied the law and the facts as she read them. And she wrote very few of the key environmental decisions, but she wrote some, and we'll talk about those. She joined the majority of several key decisions, and she actually had some interesting dissents in two of the CERCLA cases, in fact, that I think are probably two of the biggest CERCLA cases that impact our practice today. So I think people would have originally, if you ask them, say, oh, she just must have applied a liberal view to environmental law. And I think you'll find that's not always the case.
Well, you started to get ahead of us talking about the CERCLA cases. We'll save that fun for the last, and we'll start with some of the bigger ticket items here and go into climate change and Clean Air Act cases. Did she have any big decisions in that area, and what do you think her thoughts were about climate change?
Sure. So I would say I was looking up a little bit about Justice Ginsburg and climate change generally, and I found she spoke at an event in December actually, and she cited the Swedish teen climate activist Greta Thunberg as one of the future leaders in the world, giving her hope. So I think that gives you an idea definitely of her current perspective, at least on that. And again, she is looking at a young woman as a future leader. So just think of that in the context of Justice Ginsburg and all she stood for. But I would say I'll mention two cases in this front. In 2007, in what was really the Supreme Court's first climate change case, Massachusetts versus EPA, Justice Ginsburg just joined Justice Stevens' majority opinion in that case. And what that case really did was solidify EPA's authority to regulate greenhouse gases from auto tailpipes. And it really led to the Obama administration beginning to regulate carbon dioxide from cars and trucks for the very first time. So that's why that's kind of seen as the pivotal key decision. And the court there found that the state of Massachusetts indeed had standing to sue EPA here over damage caused to its state by global warming. And the court rejected EPA's argument that the Clean Air Act was not meant to refer to carbon emissions, and that EPA, in fact, if they didn't want to do that, had to demonstrate why these greenhouse gas emissions were not contributing to climate change. So it was sort of seen as the pivotal key case. And then Justice Ginsburg went on to author a decision about 4 years later in AEP versus Connecticut. And there she relied completely on the Massachusetts versus EPA case. And she found there, and the court found there, she wrote the opinion, that the Clean Air Act, in fact, displaces the federal common law rights to sue over greenhouse gases. And so someone couldn't sue under the federal common law claim of nuisance. And instead, EPA had the right instead to regulate under the Clean Air Act itself. And so therefore, in that case, and in the opinion that she wrote, she found that the private parties in the states involved could in fact not sue the power companies for contribution to climate change under the federal common law. And I would say environmentalists really saw this decision as just further confirmation that the federal government should and can be acting on climate change.
There are definitely two very large landmark climate change decisions. And it'll be very interesting to see how the new makeup of the court impacts those decisions, if any, although I think, as you sort of touched on at the beginning, I think many people will be surprised by her positions on some of those cases, even though there were nuggets for the environmental groups to pull out of it. Like you said, that she was really cementing the Clean Air Act's ability to regulate greenhouse gases. There are certainly some other things in those opinions that maybe weren't as environmentally friendly. So again, striking that balance with her being, working hard to uphold the intention of those statutes, but also having sort of a practical, balanced approach in some ways. So I think those two decisions really speak to that.
Absolutely.
Are there any other big Clean Air Act cases you want to talk about with RBG? Or
Clean Air Act's my least favorite statutes, just for the record. But there are a couple others that I think are probably worth talking about, especially because she did author two other fairly significant Clean Air Act decisions. And since she'd authored them, I think it's probably worth us talking about about them. First of all, in 2003, she authored the Alaska Department of Conservation versus EPA case, where she found the court found, and she wrote, that EPA has the authority to overrule a state agency's decision that a company is in fact using backed or best available control technology to prevent pollution. And this is an interesting case, actually, because the state of Alaska had actually approved a facility's PSD permit, so a permit of significant difference for them to build or expand a facility. And there was a complex analysis that I won't bore everybody with about nitrogen oxide and all of that involved. But Alaska had already agreed. And what happened there is EPA said, no, Alaska, you are acting unreasonably. We don't think that that is the best available technology there. And they were able to, EPA stopped construction of the facility. And basically this opinion validated EPA's ability to do that. So it was definitely a federal over state type of position under the Clean Air Act. And then the other one that I'd mention, because Justice Ginsburg authored the decision, was the EPA versus EME Homer City Generation case in 2014. And what this did is really revive the Obama administration's effort to regulate air pollution that drifts across state lines. What was also probably interesting, fun fact, this revised Kavanaugh's DC Circuit opinion. So now it was probably now with Kavanaugh on the court, but it was the only opinion, I think, of Kavanaugh's that was actually overturned. And what was found in this opinion is that if a state implementation plan, and states put these plans together to attain and maintain certain air quality standards, and if a state's plan is determined to be insufficient, EPA again has an absolute mandate to create and enforce a federal implementation plan unless the state steps up and revises its plan. And so there's a complex analysis relating to the transporter rule and upwind and all of that, and we won't get into all of that today. But again, along the lines of, giving EPA a lot of control to enforce the provisions of the Clean Air Act and understanding, or trying to at least understand and interpret the meaning behind and the intent behind that act.
Yeah, there she goes again, just really digging into the purpose and intent of the statute. I wonder if Justice Kavanaugh ever asked her about that when he came to the court about her overturning that decision.
I would have liked to have been a fly on the wall for that one.
Interesting. The first case that you mentioned there, Alaska, I actually looked at that case several times for Devin Berry, another partner in our office who, as you know, does a lot more Clean Air Act work than me, certainly. So,
bless him.
Yeah, bless him. So that is a pivotal decision, definitely, that has impacted the area of Clean Air Act law. So although I think you are more of a Clean Air Act expert than you're giving yourself credit for, we'll switch topics here and we'll jump over to one of my favorites, the Clean Water Act. Does Justice Ginsburg, have any big Clean Water Act decisions in her arsenal?
She has been involved in some there. And I think what's interesting there is, I will admit there, she definitely has a much more liberal record. She really there votes in favor of broad Clean Water Act jurisdiction as questions came up. So I'll mention a couple of cases there they call it the Swank case if you look it up, at the Solid Waste Agency of Northern Cook County versus U.S. And from 2001, Stevens wrote a dissent there that Justice Ginsburg joined. And the dissent really argued for broad interpretation of the waters of the U.S. as compared to the majority opinion in that case. So the majority found that the Clean Water Act does not actually extend to isolated wetlands and abandoned sand and gravel pits because they were not navigable or easily made so. So that was kind of the key language. And what the dissent said, Stevens and Ginsburg there, is that they were subject to federal jurisdictions, these wetlands. It's not truly navigable waters. And we really need to read the Clean Water Act this way to ensure its purpose of protecting the nation's waters is followed. And so that was kind of the first opinion that she provided her input on the Clean Water Act. That's followed by her Justice Ginsburg joining Justice Stevens' minority opinion in Rapanos. I always pronounce that horribly, so we'll just leave it at that.
We know where you're going.
Which came out in 2006. And there, it was interesting because there really wasn't a majority. There was a plurality opinion at best. But Ginsburg and Stevens, once again, side by side, the dynamic duo there. And there, the main issue was, again, wetlands were adjacent to tributaries of what were definitely navigable waters. And Scalia, her friend Scalia, issued the plurality opinion and said that the waters really needed to be relatively permanent in order for them to be regulated under the Clean Air Act. Kennedy issued his own opinion that said we need a significant nexus. And then Ginsburg and Stevens chimed in and said that the focus was actually on the ecological value of the wetlands and if they were entwined with the ecosystem of the waterways. And so again, they really just wanted more deference in determining that these wetlands should actually be regulated under the Clean Water Act. So I would say that those two kind of lay the foundation of where she's going. And then she certainly joined the majority opinion in the Maui case last year, which everyone knows what that is by now. But that case held that discharges to groundwater can actually be regulated by the Clean Water Act if they are functionally equivalent of a direct discharge. And she joined that majority opinion. So it's easy to see a theme here on that. And as we know, a lot of these questions are expected to reach the High Court again now without Justice Ginsburg there. So it'll be interesting to see where things go from here.
Yeah, it certainly will. And I think you're right that she really sort of set